I was in the middle of briefing my team on convoy protocols when the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. My stepfather, Detective Ray Martinez, had walked straight past base security and into our tactical operations center like he owned the place. The MPs flanking him looked uncomfortable, but they didn't stop him. "Staff Sergeant Williams, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud," he said, loud enough for my entire unit to hear. "You have the right to remain silent." I looked at him, 23 years of calling him Dad, and he was reading me my rights in front of my soldiers. The briefing room went dead quiet. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me. Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd been taking notes on the convoy routes, had his pen frozen halfway across the page. Private Johnson's mouth was hanging open like he was watching a movie. "Roger that," I said. That was it. No questions, no protests, no explanation. Just acknowledgement and acceptance, the way we'd been trained. Ray's face showed nothing. Perfected that cop mask years ago, same as I'd perfected my soldier face. But I caught something in his eyes for just a second, a flicker of something that might have been regret, maybe just nerves. They walked me out past the motor pool, past the chow hall, past soldiers who'd served under me for 3 years. Nobody spoke. The only sound was my boots on concrete and the jingle of handcuffs. First Sergeant Murphy was standing by the company headquarters, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with that expression he got when he was calculating damage control. The ride to the county jail took 20 minutes. Ray sat in the front passenger seat while one of the MPs drove. Neither of them said a word. I watched the familiar landscape of Fort Campbell roll past through the wire mesh window, the same roads I'd driven every day for 3 years. The same. Buildings where I'd trained soldiers and briefed missions and lived my life as a professional soldier. 20 minutes to destroy everything I'd built. Ray had married my mother when I was 7. He was a good man then, or seemed to be. He taught me to throw a baseball in the backyard of our small house in Clarksville. Helped with homework at the kitchen table under the fluorescent light that always flickered, showed up to parent-teacher conferences in his pressed uniform with his hat tucked under his arm, like he was presenting himself for inspection. Mom had been struggling since my biological father disappeared when I was 5. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner downtown, evenings cleaning offices. She'd come home exhausted, count the tips on the kitchen counter, and try to figure out if there was enough money for groceries and rent both. Ray stepped in like he'd been waiting his whole life to be somebody's dad. He was patient with me in ways my real father never had been. When I broke his favorite coffee mug, the one with the police department logo, he just cleaned up the pieces and told me accidents happen. When I got in trouble at school for fighting, he sat me down and explained about choosing battles and walking away from conflicts that weren't worth winning. When I struggled with math, he'd sit with me every evening for 2 hours working through problems until I understood. The first time I called him Dad was 6 months after he married Mom. I was 8 years old. I'd been thinking about it for weeks. We were in the garage, and he was teaching me to change the oil in his pickup truck. I was holding the wrench, and he was guiding my hands, showing me how to loosen the drain plug. "Dad," I said, testing the word like this. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. His eyes got wet, and he cleared his throat twice before he could speak. "Yeah, son," just like that. From that day forward, Ray Martinez wasn't my stepfather. He was my father. He adopted me legally when I turned 10, and my name changed from Jake Williams to Jake Martinez Williams. He said I should keep my birth name as part of my identity, but I could carry his too. He was the one who drove me to the recruitment office when I turned 18. Sat in the waiting room for 2 hours while I took the ASVAB, reading a magazine and drinking coffee from a paper cup. When I came out with my scores, he looked at them and nodded. "Army's lucky to have you," he said, and shook the recruiter's hand. "You take care of my boy." When the first shipped out to Fort Benning for basic training, he was there at Nashville Airport. With Mom, both of them were crying, but trying to hide it. Ray pulled me aside before I went through security. "Take care of yourself, son," he'd said. "Come home safe. Your mother needs you to come home safe." "I will, Dad. I remember what I taught you about choosing battles. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away." I did come home safe, from basic training, from advanced individual training, from 3 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Each time Ray was there. He helped me buy my first car with my combat pay, a used Honda Civic that he spent 2 days inspecting from bumper to bumper before he'd let me sign the papers. He co-signed on my apartment lease when I got stationed at Campbell, even though I could have qualified on my own. He even helped me open a savings account at his credit union. He's walking me through the paperwork and explaining compound interest like I was still 10 years old. Money management is crucial, he'd said. You're making good money now, but you need to be smart about it. Plan for the future. Build something solid. He knew all my financial business because he'd been helping me manage it since I was 18 and didn't know better. At first, it made sense. I was young. I was deployed half the time, and I trusted him completely. He'd never given me a reason not to. The red flags were small. Questions about my pay schedule that seemed just a little too frequent. Asking to see my bank statements just to make sure everything looked right when I'd never had problems before. Offering to handle paperwork when I was deployed because it would be easier than trying to manage it from overseas. Suggesting investment accounts that I didn't really understand but signed up for anyway because he recommended them 2 years ago. When I made staff sergeant, he suggested I let him manage my investments more actively. You're making good money now, he'd said over dinner at Mom's house. $38,000 a year base pay, plus combat pay, plus allowances. Need to be smart about it. Make it work for you. I signed the papers he brought me the next week. Power of attorney for investment management, authorization to move money between accounts, insurance beneficiary forms. Standard stuff, he said. Father looking out for son, making sure everything was set up properly. I should have read them closer. Should have asked more questions. I should have remembered that Ray had taught me to be suspicious of people who wanted too much control over my life, but he was my father, and you trust your father. 3 hours after my arrest, I was sitting in county lockup wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled like industrial detergent and defeat. The cell was 8 by 10 feet, with a metal toilet, a concrete bench, and a small window that looked out onto the parking lot. Could see my own truck still parked where I'd left it that morning, the visitor's lot at the base. My lawyer arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Captain Jennifer Chen, JAG officer, sharp as a blade and twice as cutting. She'd gotten the call from First Sergeant Murphy, who'd gotten it from my mother, who'd called everyone she could think of after Ray arrested me. They're claiming you stole $47,000 from a military family assistance fund, she said, sliding a folder across the metal table in the interview room. Forged signatures, fake invoices, falsified records. The works. I looked at the documents. The signature was on every one of them, except it wasn't my signature. Close, but not quite right. The J in Jake was too rounded, the W in Williams had an extra loop. The kind of mistake someone would make if they'd been practicing but hadn't quite gotten it right. This isn't my handwriting, I said. You're sure? I've been signing documents. For the Army for 7 years, I know my own signature. Captain Chen made notes on a yellow legal pad. The prosecution has bank records showing the money being transferred from the Family Assistance Fund to accounts in your name. They have invoices for services that were never rendered. They have documentation of charity donations that never reached their intended recipients. Ray did this? Your stepfather? The arresting officer? Has had access to all my accounts for? Years, power of attorney, investment management, everything. He knows how I sign my name better than anyone. It's a serious accusation, it's the truth. Captain Chen leaned back in her chair. Walk me through your financial relationship with Detective Martinez. Everything, from the beginning. I spent the next hour telling her everything. The savings account he'd helped me open, the investment accounts, the power of attorney documents, the way he'd gradually taken more and more control over my finances. She took notes, asked questions, and occasionally looked up from her legal pad with an expression that got progressively more concerned. We'll need to prove that, she said. Finally, do you have any records of your legitimate transactions? Everything's digital. Bank statements, investment records, all of it. But Ray's been managing most of it. Then we start from scratch. I need you to make a list of every financial institution you've done business with, every account you've opened, every investment you've made, everything. The list took 2 pages. The first thing I did after making bail was call my bank. The customer service rep was polite, but couldn't tell me much over the phone. I'd have to come in person with proper identification and documentation. I drove straight there from the courthouse. Still wearing the civilian clothes Captain Chen had brought me, the bank was a small credit union in downtown Clarksville, the same one Ray had helped me join when I was 18. I'd been banking there for 7 years, knew most of the tellers. By name, had never had a problem with anything. The account history took 2 hours to print. Sarah, the branch manager, had to use 3 different computers to access all the records. She kept apologizing for the delay, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She knew Ray, knew me, knew this wasn't normal. "Is everything okay, Jake?" she asked while we waited for the printer to finish. "I'm not sure yet." The papers filled a manila folder 2 inches thick. Account statements, transaction records, investment transfers, loan applications I'd never seen before. As I read through them, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. $40,000–$7,000 had been moved out of my investment account in small increments over 18 months. Never more than $3,000 at a time. Never on a regular schedule. The transfers were authorized with digital signatures that looked like mine, but weren't quite right. Each transfer was followed by a corresponding deposit into what the bank called a charitable organization account. The charitable organization was called Veterans Family Support Fund. The account had been opened 3 years ago by Ray Martinez, listing himself as the primary authorized user. I'd never heard of it. I called Captain Chen from the bank parking lot. "I need you to run a background check on this charity. Something's not right." "Already on it," she said. "I pulled the incorporation documents an hour ago. Guess who the registered agent is?" I knew before she said it. Ray Martinez, and the sole board member, and the primary signatory on all accounts. "Jake, this charity exists only on paper. There's number office, no staff, no charitable activities. It's a shell company. How much money are we talking about?" "Based on the bank records you just described, probably a lot more than $47,000. That's just what they're charging you with." That evening, I drove to Mom's house. She was waiting for me in the living room, sitting in Ray's chair with a cup of coffee, getting cold in her hands. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in one day. "I know what you're thinking," she said before I could speak. What am I thinking that I knew, that I was part of it? I sat down on the couch across from her, the same couch where Ray had helped me with homework, where we'd watched football games, where he'd taught me to tie a tie before my high school graduation. "Were you?" "No." She looked at me with eyes that were red from crying. "I swear to God, Jake, I didn't know." "He showed me papers, said he was helping you invest your money. Said he was proud of how responsible you were being, how you were planning for the future." "What papers? Investment statements? Account balances?" "Things that looked official. Said you were doing really well, that you were building a solid financial foundation." "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She nodded. "Has Ray been having money problems?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she sighed and set down her coffee cup. "We took out a second mortgage on the house last year. He said it was for home improvements, but we never did any work. He bought a new truck, said he needed it for work. Started going to the casino in Nashville on weekends. Said it was just for fun, just small amounts." "How much gambling?" "I don't know. He never talked about it. But he's been getting phone calls, people asking for money. He always took the calls in the garage or outside. Why didn't you tell me?" He said it was under control. Said he had a plan to pay everything back. I looked around the living room. The same furniture we'd had for 15 years, the same family photos on the mantle, the same wooden cross Ray had hung above the television when he first moved in. Everything looked normal, but nothing was normal anymore. "Mom, I think Ray stole money from me, a lot of money." She started crying then. Not the quiet tears I'd seen when I deployed, but ugly, broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep. Inside her, I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." The next morning, I started making calls. Real calls, to real people who could help. My first call was to the FBI field office in Nashville. The duty agent listened to my story, asked a few questions, and transferred me to white-collar crimes. Special Agent Patricia Dawson sounded tired but interested. How long has your stepfather had access to your accounts? 5 years, maybe 6, since I made sergeant and you gave him power of attorney for investment management. I trusted him. Any idea how much money we're talking about? Based on what I've seen so far, probably more than $47,000. That's just what they're charging me with. Agent Dawson was quiet for a moment. Staff Sergeant Williams, I'm going to need. You two come in tomorrow morning. Bring every document you have. Every bank statement, every investment record, every piece of paper related to your finances. What happens next? We investigate. If what you're telling me is true, your stepfather has committed multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud, money laundering, theft. This isn't just about you anymore. The FBI office in Nashville was nothing like the movies. Gray carpet, fluorescent lights, government tissue furniture that looked like it had been ordered from the same catalog we used at the base. Agent Dawson was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes who looked like she could have been my high school math teacher. She had a file folder an inch thick waiting for me. We've been watching Detective Martinez for 6 months, she said. You're not the first complaint we've received. She opened the folder. Inside were photos, bank records, surveillance reports, and witness statements. Ray had been running the Veterans Family Support Fund for 3 years. The fund collected donations from local businesses, church groups, and individual donors. Money was supposed to help military families with emergency expenses, rent, utilities, car repairs, medical bills. None of it ever reached any military families. How much? I asked. So far, we've documented $230,000, but we think it's more. How many victims? 12 that we know of. All active duty or veterans. All people who trusted him with their financial information. Agent Dawson spread the photos across the table. Pictures of Ray at the casino, at the bank, at a boat dealership. Pictures of a vacation home in Florida that I'd never seen before. Pictures of him meeting with people I didn't recognize. Your stepfather has been living a double life, she said. The gambling problem is real, but it's just part of it. He's been using the charity as a personal piggy bank for 3 years. What do you need from me? Everything. Complete financial records, testimony about your relationship with him, details about how he gained access to your accounts. We're building a case, but we need victims to cooperate. What about the other victims? Who are they? Agent Dawson pulled out another folder. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, stationed at Fort Campbell. Detective Martinez helped her open investment accounts. When she got back from deployment, lost $22,000. She flipped through more files. Corporal David Kim, Army National Guard. Ray helped him manage his education benefits. Stole $18,000 over 2 years. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson, retired. Ray convinced him to invest his pension in a fund that didn't exist. $63,000. Master Sergeant Angela Thompson, Air Force. Ray helped her set up college funds for her kids. $41,000. The list went on. 12 families, 12 stories of trust betrayed. 12 people who had believed Ray Martinez when he said he was looking out for their best interests. What happens to him now? We arrest him. We charge him with multiple felonies. We try to recover as much money as we can. But I need to be honest with you. Most of it is probably gone. The arrest happened 6 days later. I was back at work, trying to pretend everything was normal, trying to focus on training my soldiers and preparing for an upcoming deployment. But every time my phone rang, I expected it to be Agent Dawson. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when she called. It's done. We took him into custody an hour ago. I was in my office, reviewing supply requests. I set down my pen and looked out the window at the training area where my soldiers were running battle drills. Where? At the police station. He was on duty. He coordinated with his supervisor to make it as low-key as possible. What's he charged with? Wire fraud, money laundering, theft of government property, and operating a fraudulent charity. Looking at 10 to 15 years? And the other victims? We're contacting them today? We'll need statements from everyone. What about restitution? We're working on it. We've frozen his assets, but there's not much left. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, the boat is financed, the truck is leased. We'll recover what we can, but it won't be everything. I hung up and sat in my office for 20 minutes, staring at the wall. Then I called my mother. "Mom, you need to sit down. What's wrong?" They arrested Ray. Silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. Then I heard her breath catch. "When about an hour ago, federal agents at the police station." "What's going to happen to him?" "Prison. Probably for a long time. And us. I don't know, Mom, but we'll figure it out." That afternoon, I drove to my mother's house. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her work clothes, staring at nothing. The house felt different somehow, smaller, emptier, like something essential had been removed. "I didn't know," she said when I came in. "I swear to God, I didn't know." "I know, Mom." Showed me papers. Said he was helping you invest your money. Said he was proud of how responsible you were being. "I know." "What am I supposed to do now? I can't afford this house on my own. I can't afford anything on my own." She started crying then, and I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. She felt fragile, like she might break apart if I held her too tightly. "We'll figure it out," I said, "one step at a time." I loved him, Jake. I really loved him. I know you did. I think he loved us too. But something went wrong. Something broke inside him, and he couldn't fix it. I thought about that. About the man who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had been there for every important moment in my life, about the man who had stolen from me, lied to me, and violated my trust in ways that couldn't be repaired. "Maybe," I said, "but love doesn't excuse what he did." The media attention started the next day. Local detective arrested in charity fraud scheme read the headline in the Clarksville newspaper. The article was short but detailed, describing Ray's arrest and the charges against him. It mentioned that he had been stealing from military families, that he had been operating a fraudulent charity, that the FBI had been investigating him for months. My phone started ringing. Reporters, fellow soldiers, people I hadn't heard from in years. Wanted to know what I knew, how I felt, what I planned to do next. I stopped answering. The story spread to Nashville, then to other cities. "Trusted police detective betrays military families" was the headline in the Nashville paper. The details were accurate but incomplete. They didn't mention that Ray had been my father for 20 years. They didn't mention that he had taught me to throw a baseball, helped me with homework, had been there for every important moment in my childhood. They didn't mention that betrayal could be complicated. 2 weeks after Ray's arrest, the other victims, Agent Dawson had organized a meeting at the FBI office, partly to coordinate our testimony and partly to help us understand that we weren't alone. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez was 32, married with 2 kids, stationed at Fort Campbell like me. She'd trusted Ray with her deployment savings, money she'd planned to use for a down payment on a house, $22,000, gone. Corporal David Kim was younger, maybe 25, quiet and serious. He'd been using Ray's investment. Advice to save for college. $18,000 that was supposed to pay for his degree. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson was retired, gray-haired, and distinguished. He'd trusted Ray with his pension money, funds he'd been counting on for retirement. $63,000 that represented 30 years of military service. Master. Sergeant Angela Thompson was maybe 40, tough as nails, with pictures of her kids on her phone. She'd been saving for their college educations, trusting Ray to help her navigate the complicated world of investment accounts and education funds. $41,000 that was supposed to secure her children's futures. The stories were all different, but they were all the same. Ray had approached each of us with offers to help, to provide financial guidance, to manage our money more effectively. He'd used his position as a police officer, his knowledge of military culture, and his understanding of our financial situations to gain our trust. Then he'd stolen from us. The hardest part, said Maria Rodriguez, is that I recommended him to other people. I told my friends he was trustworthy, that he'd help me set up my accounts. I feel responsible for what happened to them. It's not your fault, said Lieutenant Colonel Peterson. He was good at what he did. He knew how to make people trust him. What I don't understand, said Corporal Kim, is why he chose military families. Why target people who serve their country? Agent Dawson answered that question because you're predictable. You have steady incomes, you deploy regularly, and you're trained to trust authority figures. You're also often young and inexperienced. With financial management, you were perfect victims. The meeting lasted 2 hours. We shared stories, compared experiences, and tried to understand how we'd all been fooled by the same person. When it was over, we exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch, walking out of the FBI office. I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not because the case was progressing, but because I wasn't alone. 12 people had trusted Ray Martinez, and 12 people had been betrayed. It wasn't about poor judgment or naivety. It was about a criminal who had systematically exploited people who trusted him. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for October. Ray pleaded not guilty, but his lawyer seemed to be preparing for plea negotiations rather than trial. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, forged documents, witness testimony, and forensic analysis of the digital signatures. I testified at the hearing, describing my relationship with Ray and how he'd gained access to my financial accounts. The prosecutor asked me to read aloud from some of the investment documents I'd signed, documents that authorized Ray to move money between accounts. Did you understand what you were signing when you authorized these transfers? The prosecutor asked. I thought I was giving him permission to move money between my investment accounts to maximize returns, I said. I didn't know he was moving money to accounts that didn't belong to me. Did you ever authorize him to donate your money to charity? No. Did you ever authorize him to use your money for his personal expenses? No. Did you know about the Veterans Family Support Fund? Not until after my arrest. Ray's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to establish that I had known about the charity and had agreed to donate money to it. But the forensic evidence was clear. Signatures were forgeries, the charity was a shell company, and the money had gone straight into Ray's personal accounts. After the hearing, I saw Ray in the hallway. He was wearing a gray suit instead of his police uniform, and he looked older somehow, smaller. Our eyes met for a moment. I saw something in his expression that might have been regret. He started to say something, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm and guided him away. I watched them walk down the hallway until they disappeared around a corner. The trial was scheduled for January. Ray's lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested in anything less than significant prison time. Too many victims, too much money, too much premeditation. While we waited for trial, I tried to rebuild my life. The Army had cleared me of any wrongdoing, and my security clearance was reinstated. My first sergeant wrote a letter of recommendation. That helped me get promoted to Sergeant First Class 2 months ahead of schedule. I moved to a new apartment, opened new bank accounts, and started managing my own finances. It was more work than I'd expected, but I was learning to navigate investment accounts, insurance policies, and retirement planning without Ray's help. My mother sold the house and moved to a small apartment across town. She couldn't afford the mortgage payments on her own, and the house had too many memories anyway. The sale barely covered what she owed, but it was enough to give her a fresh start. I keep expecting him to call, she told me one evening. I keep thinking he's going to walk through the door and explain everything. Make it all make sense. Do! You want him to? I don't know. Part of me misses him. Part of me hates him. Part of me just wants to understand why he did it. Maybe there isn't a why. Maybe some people just make bad choices. He wasn't a bad person, Jake. He was a good father to you. He was a good husband to me. Something went wrong, but he wasn't always like this. I thought about that conversation for weeks, about the complexity of human nature, about the possibility that good people could do terrible things, about the difference between explaining behavior and excusing it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Ray pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, falsified charity documents, testimony from 12 victims who trusted him with their financial futures. The prosecution laid it out piece by piece, methodically and without drama. The defense tried to argue that Ray had been helping military families informally, that the charity was legitimate, that the money had been used for its intended purposes. But the forensic evidence was clear. The Veterans Family Support Fund had never helped a single military family. Every dollar had gone into Ray's personal accounts. I testified on the second day. The prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with Ray, how I'd given him power of attorney, how I'd trusted him with my money. I kept my answers short and factual. No emotion, no anger, just the facts. Detective Martinez raised you from the age of 7, is that correct? Yes. You considered him your father. Yes. You trusted him with your financial affairs. Yes. Did you ever authorize him to steal from you? No. Ray's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to establish that I had been a willing participant in the scheme, but the evidence was clear. I had given Ray permission to manage my investments, not to steal from me. Other victims testified throughout the week. Maria Rodriguez described how Ray had convinced her to consolidate her accounts, making it easier for him to transfer money. David Kim explained how Ray had used his military knowledge to gain his trust. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson testified about Ray's detailed knowledge of military pay and benefits, knowledge that had made his advice seem credible. The most damaging testimony came from the forensic accountant. She had traced every dollar that had flowed through the veteran's family support fund. The money had gone to Ray's personal accounts, to the casino, to luxury purchases, to loan payments. None of it had ever reached military families. On the final day of testimony, Ray took the stand. He tried to explain that he had been helping military families informally, that the charity was just a way to organize the donations that he had, always intended to make everything right. But when the prosecutor showed him the bank records, showed him the photos of the new truck, the boat, the vacation home in Florida, he stopped talking. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern too clear. Detective Martinez, the prosecutor said, "Did you steal money from military families?" Ray looked at his lawyer, looked at the jury, looked at the evidence spread across the prosecutor's table. Then he looked at me, as he said. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, money laundering, theft of government property, operating a fraudulent charity. Ray sat motionless as the verdict was read, his face expressionless. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Ray was remanded to federal custody to await sentencing. I was walking out of the courthouse when I saw my mother sitting on a bench outside. She looked small and alone, wearing the same black dress she'd worn to Ray's father's funeral 2 years earlier. "How are you doing?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "I keep thinking about the good times, the barbecues in the backyard, the fishing trips to the lake, the way he used to help you with your homework. Those were real, Mom. The good times were real. But so was this, the stealing, the lying, the betrayal. It was all real. Yeah, it was all real. How do you reconcile that? How do you hold both things in your head at the same time?" I sat down. Next to her on the bench, "I don't know, but I think we have to try." Ray was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge ordered full restitution to all victims, but the money was mostly gone. The government recovered about 60 cents on the dollar through asset forfeiture, the boat, the truck, the vacation home, the remaining balance in his accounts. I got back 28,000 of the 47,000 he'd stolen from me. The other victims fared similarly. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson recovered about 40,000 of the 63,000 he'd lost. Maria Rodriguez got back 14,000 of her 22,000. It was something, but it wasn't enough. The financial damage was significant, but the emotional damage was worse. We'd all learned that trust was fragile, that people could change, that even the closest relationships could be built on lies. 6 months after the sentencing, I was cleaning out my desk when I found the letter. Ray had written it 3 months before his arrest, sealed it in an envelope with my name on it. The desk sergeant at the police station said Ray had left it with instructions to give it to me if anything ever happened to him. The letter was 4 pages handwritten in Ray's careful script. It started with an apology, then moved into explanations. It started taking small amounts to help with Mom's medical bills when she'd been sick 2 years earlier. Just temporary loans, he'd said. He'd meant to pay it back. But then there had been other expenses, other emergencies. The gambling had started as a way to make quick money to pay everything back. Instead, it had made everything worse. He'd lost more money, needed more loans, taken more from the accounts he was managing. The charity had been his way of trying to make it legitimate, he wrote. He'd really intended to help military families. But the money had kept disappearing into his own expenses, his own debts, his own problems. He'd kept taking more to cover the shortfall, telling himself he'd pay it back when he won big at the casino.